Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 247 DIY. Today we're going to be going ahead and rolling the fenders on my 2002 WRX that we just recently lowered on an air ride setup, so stick around. So you probably already saw from the thumbnail on the video, rolling the fenders did not go according to plan. And while the results were not a perfect 10 out of 10 execution that I was looking for, they're also not the end of the world. They can be fixed by a couple different ways that we might tackle in the future, but right now I did want to get the footage that I recorded out so you can see exactly what went into some of the progress here on the WRX, as well as be able to cut away and identify some of the issues that I ran into, particularly using the tool, but also some technique issues. That way, if you've come across this video and you're interested in rolling your fenders, either using this tool or another method, you might be able to learn from some of my mistakes and your project might come out a little bit better. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll get the car up on the lift and we'll go from there. All right, so we're gonna be starting on the back here, and the most important part, at least to start off with, is your prep work. Now these WRXs came with this little rubber strip that covers the lip here. I've already gotten rid of those aren't on there anymore, but what you wanna do is on the back side of your lip, you need to come in and remove any mud, dirt, debris, anything that might be up inside there, because when we fold this fender material up, anything that's relatively large in there, you're gonna see, because it's gonna pinch. And then when it pinches, you're just going to see it kind of poke through the surface of the paint after we get these fenders rolled. So I've already come through. I just kind of rubbed the inner lip here and got all of the sand out of there. And then I just came through with a rag and just some soapy water. Just clean it up. It doesn't have to be like paint prep perfect, but just enough where you don't have any big chunks of debris up in there. All right, and then if your vehicle's lowered like mine is, you're going to have to set up your fender roller for the lowered position. These Eastwood rollers come with a setup that's ideal for factory suspension, or at least the way it droops once it's on a lift. Pretty simple. All you do is you remove this pin here, it'll come in this hole. You just, once everything's undone, so you're gonna pull that pin, you're gonna undo that Allen head, there's one on the other side, you're gonna slide this unit up, replace the pin so that it's in this hole, and then your Allen heads so that they're in this lower hole. And then all we're gonna do is we're gonna place this on our lugs. You're going to take one of these tapered washers that comes with the tool, place it over your lug, and then just utilize your lug nuts to then hold the roller in place. And then we'll just snug these up. They don't need to be super tight, just so that it secures it to the hub face. All right, so I've already run into some difficulties. Because this suspension is lowered, it actually is lower enough to the point where that fender roller can't quite get into position and be bolted to the hub. Plus, when I'm looking at it, this lip is kind of angled a bit differently than sort of the way they would expect your starting fender to be angled. So what we're going to do is we're going to hand form this a little bit first. We're going to try to be as gentle as possible. All I'm going to do, and we're going to have needed to do this anyway with the heat gun. We're going to come in with a heat gun. We're going to warm this up so the paint becomes pliable. I'm going to take a rubber hammer and I'm just going to start to hand form this lip up and in so that it's in position ready for the fender roller. I think all I need to do is get this angled up a little bit and then we should be able to get the roller in there. All right, so even after hand forming this a bit, It still doesn't work exactly as intended, mainly just because the suspension is so low, or at least that's kind of what it seems like here. I can't get it all the way on the hub and then have this wheel in the correct position. So one thing I ended up having to do, you can see here, it just wouldn't, I can't get it in there flush and then have enough room to be able to use the wheel. So the kit comes with 5 spacers, even though you only end up using 4, at least for this particular vehicle. So I threw that 1 spacer back just to have something to kind of clamp this down to so it stays secure. Still not 100% sure that we're going to be able to work it into the right position with the way it's set up, but really it just looks like I might have to add some more space down here to get this arm in, so then the wheel can come at the angle we're going to want to finish this off. But basically what we're going to do now is we're going to keep running this along here, along the edge, back and forth, and then every time we feel like it's been formed, we're just going to go ahead and tighten this up down here, and that will continue to form that. So we'll go ahead and move on with doing that. All right, so I'm actually pretty happy with that. One thing that is kind of a positive about that not quite fitting in there properly is it gives me a bit of a pull as well. If I want to run something really aggressive in the future, it did sort of pull this out a bit as well, which down the road I may need. One thing, if you're doing this at home, definitely pay attention to your heat. I kind of got moving quick and I was like, well, nothing bad's going on so far. And it got moving fast, and you can see some paint started to peel here because I wasn't being careful with my heat. But if we get up inside there, you can see that lip is nicely rolled over and formed to the whole inner radius there. If you look down the fender, there is a slight bit of waviness, and I think that's because I went for like the completely folded over fender look with the lip here. Some people just run a mild roll. I wanted that rolled right over flat. So I think what that did is it just kind of gave me just a touch of waviness in the fender, but now we're just gonna go ahead and move on to the front. All right, so we'll go ahead and cut it right there. Just want to address, there's about 3 things that I want to address up to this point. So first is the heating up and working of the rear arches with the hammer. I still feel that was necessary. When you take a look at those lips, at least on this particular model WRX, they're not at a 90-degree angle to the fender. They actually are down a little bit. And realistically, this isn't going to be able to take that from that downward angle and then roll it up very easily. So you are going to have to go ahead and at least take the hammer and just work that fender a little bit up to at least a 90, maybe a little bit more. I went pretty extreme because I had already looked at this tool and had thought that it wasn't going to fit. We'll get into that in a minute. And I realized that I needed to put a little bit more in it. Did that perfectly fine without any paint splitting, without adding any dents to the fender. You just kind of have to go slow and take your time. But that part, I will say, for this particular model WRX is something that's going to be necessary on the rear arches. And then we went on to the sort of biggest glaring issue, and you'll see later in the video I did figure it out for the very last fender that I did. This tool is a little bit annoying, at least now with hindsight being 2020, the way that it operates. So when you have it bolted up to the hub, obviously you would be looking at it in this orientation. Turning this crank wheel here in a clockwise fashion loosens it. And I got, from the way it came after we adjusted it for the lowered ride height, I got about, I think, maybe 2 turns out of it, and it just felt like it was binding up and didn't want to go any further. And it says in the instructions, and also says here on the sticker, not to over tighten anything because you can damage the tool. So having worked on cars for a long time and knowing sort of what it feels like when things want to bind up right before you're about to shear something off, like a bolt, and then also having all these stickers and stuff all over it, I assumed that that was the maximum in that direction, tilting this backwards, that it would go. I found out later on that wasn't the case. Just needed to realize you're not going to break the tool and put a little bit more muscle into it and continue to turn it even though it feels like it's binding, and that will give you more than enough angle, trust me, to get that in underneath the fender. And then what that's going to avoid is you don't have to put so much pressure to try to start rotating that lip up and fold it over. Again, we'll get into another issue that I ran into that was a product of applying a lot of pressure with the wrong angle on this wheel, because I felt as though the tool wasn't capable of getting in there at the proper angle. So you absolutely can loosen this way more than it comes. I'm assuming they probably all come in the same pre-set up configuration. I would just say don't worry too much about damaging anything if it's going to bind up, because this felt like I was going to damage it, but it will continue to turn. And like I said, this arm will rotate further backwards, allowing you to place this wheel here at the appropriate angle on the fender, so you can get a little bit of a better result. You can take your time, go a little bit slower, and use a little bit less pressure. And just to avoid having to cut away an additional time to cover something that I can talk about now, I did show how the paint split on that one spot on the fender, and I could tell that that was 100% me. Like I said in the video, I had started to go and things were going pretty smoothly, getting that fender rolled, and I just got going too quick and didn't add heat into the lower portion of the wheel arch there in the fender, and that was absolutely me that split that paint. However, I did want to go with a completely 180-degree folded over fender lip, and having done all 4 fenders and used a lot of heat, tried to take my time and go as slow as I can, depending on probably the age of your vehicle. I mean, this is a 21-year-old vehicle, so that paint's pretty old. I think that may have been the problem. It's also going to come down to the quality of paint that was on the vehicle, the thickness of the paint that was on the vehicle, how well it was applied at the factory. But when, in my opinion here, it was unavoidable going with the complete 180 roll on the fender. Not everybody does a complete 180-degree roll. Some people just go with a 45, a little bit more, without actually pushing that lip all the way over, but that's what I wanted. We are going to attempt to put a pretty aggressive wheel on this car, at least for what I'm aiming for, which is as little bit of camber as possible. I don't want that super specced out, crazy camber. It's ridiculous in my opinion. Other people, it's what they want on their cars. I don't want that. So it's going to be a pretty aggressive setup to try to run with very minimal camber. I knew I wanted that lip rolled all the way over, and to me it just seemed like it's unavoidable. Once you get all the way to that point, the paint will split at certain points on the fender. I added a ton of heat. I went very slow. It just seemed to want to split once you completely push that lip all the way over. But that's that for the rear. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the time lapses from this point moving forward. I was messing around with this camera a little bit. I wanted to try out doing time lapse actually in the camera instead of in post. I didn't pay attention to the time interval between the pictures, and so the time lapses are going to go by real quickly until closer to the end, when I realized I had the time interval set too short or too long. So just bear with me on that. The time lapses in the beginning are going to go by pretty quick. I think I'm just going to go back to doing time lapses in post. It seems to be the best way to do it. But again, let's go ahead and we'll jump right back in. We'll move to the front end of the car. All right, if you remember from before, I mentioned that when the front suspension's aired all the way out, you can't quite air it all the way out because the axle hit the pinch weld of the frame. So you can see here that this is how it looked before, and then I just spent some time with a body saw and some carbide bits. I just cut a little notch up into the pinch weld there. That's about as far as you can get before it actually starts being flush with the body behind the pinch weld there. So that should give me, I don't know, half an inch, a little over half an inch more on the drop in the front when I want to air it out. I'm also going to go ahead and just zip these little tabs off here with the angle grinder, since we're not going to need them anymore, before we go ahead and start rolling these fenders. So yeah, I ended up with the same fitment issue here in the front. The lip is angled a little bit better, where I don't think I'm going to have to hand form it first. We're going to just start heating this lip up, go from there. I have a feeling as this starts to bend, we're going to loosen up down here, so I'm going to have to tighten these back down as we start to bend that. But as long as I keep an eye on everything, just work a little bit at a time, it should be no problem. If you caught it in there, I did have to remove the caliper in order to get enough clearance for that roller to swing all the way down and get some of this. This one didn't go as great as the back one. As far as the roll's fine, but I got lots of splitting up through here. I came through with a Scotch-Brite and just kind of cleaned up the loose paint hanging there. So at a distance, it looks fine. Up close, not so great. If I can get this camera to focus here. There we go. You get lots of splitting up along there. This fender wasn't perfect anyway. I got like a little rust spot starting here. So at some point, I'll just come through and maybe do my best to touch this up with a little bit of touch-up paint just to prevent some rust, and then maybe further down the road get a bit more of a professional repair done on these fenders. But I'm not too worried about it right now because that's just what happens sometimes when you roll a fender. And so another important thing I want to point out that you may have saw in that time lapse, and you may see in the next time lapse because it's when I fixed the time interval and it's a little bit longer, really go ahead and take your time and kind of step away from the project every time you feel like you want to tighten it down and go a little bit more. I found after rolling the fender and then stepping back, it is super easy to get carried away with this. I ended up putting a very aggressive pull on the fender at the same time that I rolled it, which ended up putting some rippling, some waviness in the lip edge of the fender, just because the metal got stretched to the point where it's a little wavy now. It's not perfect, but at the end of the day, this car was never intended to be like a show car. It doesn't need to be perfect. It does bother me a little bit. But one thing that I was planning on doing in the future anyway was maybe running an even more aggressive setup on the car and utilizing the Carlton style over fenders on the car, which means that I'd be able to cut out a good portion of the damaged fender and just run an over fender. It's something that's within the realm of possibilities for me now, especially you would have seen in a previous video. We've outfitted the shop with a pretty decent air compressor. I should be able, if I want to pick up a paint gun now at this point, be able to go ahead and start painting small projects. I don't think I'll ever be at the point where I would be able to paint a whole car, but if I wanted to paint match to the body color of the WRX there, small parts like over fenders or side skirts or lips, I feel like that's a project I could move on to now that I'm set up a little bit better. So that's definitely something that I'm seriously going to be looking into for the future. I don't think I want the waviness in these fenders to be something that's a permanent look for the car. Again, it's probably something more that I see because I know it's there than somebody looking at the car. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's a learning experience. I'm not that bummed out about it, and we can always fix it. So best practice with this is just take your time and take several moments to take a step back and see how the fender's progressing. Don't fall in the same trap I did while just being in front of the wheel, using the tool and trying to go all the way to the finish and then see what it looks like. Because like I said, it didn't seem like I had pulled the fender very much at all. I added a lot of pressure because it just seemed like I needed to do more. I needed to go more. And then I stepped back and was like, wow, I went a little bit too much. So take your time. That's the best tip I can have with this. Go slow, take your time, take some moments to step back and check your work before you move on. So now we need to go ahead and get the splash guard installed back in there. All right, so you can see now that the fender's been rolled and stretched a bit. One, the fender really has, or the liner really has nothing to grab onto, but two, because the fender's changed shape a little bit, you can see how it hangs down. So I'm gonna just start coming at this a little by little. I'm gonna start here and cut this out probably all the way over to here. And then I know a lot of people said that this can be heat formed, heat up with a heat gun and then stretched. So I'm just gonna cut away for a minute, kind of play with this, and I'll come back and show you what I did. All right, so after a little bit of cutting and stretching with the heat gun, it at least sits up behind the fender now. I don't know if it's gonna relax at all. It shouldn't, if you think about it. It should cool off and then hold that shape. But it does sit behind the fender, and we'll just have to see how that holds up. And so there's the last fender you just saw. That was after I figured the tool out. If you could see from the time lapse, it did go quite a bit smoother. In terms of aesthetics, I really liked, that's this fender right here. I really liked how that one ended up coming out, but because the other side was already done and I had put that pretty extreme pull into it, I pulled this one just to match the other side. The rears came out really good. I like the rears. There's barely any noticeable waviness in the rear. And on these WRXs, to fit a square setup on the car, you need more of a pull in the rear. It's harder to fit aggressive wheels and tires in the rear than it is the front. But after figuring the tool out, it went way smoother. It started off with a pretty flat angle just to start to get that fender rolled over. And then having figured it out and now having the room to adjust the tool so that I could rotate the rolling wheel to a more aggressive angle that ultimately I wanted the fender rolled at, it did go a lot smoother. I still had the paint cracking issue. Again, I think that's an unavoidable issue if you're going with a completely folded over roll on these fenders. So that's gonna do it for this one, guys. I know it's a little bit different than how I normally do my videos, but I really didn't wanna just scrap the footage that I took. Like I said, for you guys that are following the WRX, I didn't wanna just shortchange you guys on some of the work that's been done and just come back weeks later and be like, oh yeah, we did all this work and you don't even get a chance to see it. So I wanted to get that footage out there, but at the same time, there's always the opportunity to learn from mistakes. I'm completely willing to say that yes, I made some mistakes on this. It's not the end of the world, it's a car. Everything on a car is fixable. You can always fix anything on a car. It just depends on how much time and effort you have to put forth to fix the mistake. But I hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it, so please leave a comment below if you have anything to add. And if you're not subscribed already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And just to let you know, we are on Instagram now. I decided to create a page just to keep you guys up to date on little things that are going on with the channel, little updates with the projects, and maybe things that don't necessarily deserve a full-length video. So feel free to go ahead and follow us on Instagram. I'll leave a link in the end screen as well as in the comments down below. Thanks.